no matter how bellicose the rhetoric is out of Brussels and Paris and London. The reality is that the European armies cannot muster sufficient forces and sustain them logistically to have any meaningful impact. But what they are doing, and I think this will play into what we'll be talking about later, is tying up Donald Trump's hands. Because by bringing up this language and seeking to detach themselves from the United States, they're calling his bluff. Donald Trump has been, saying, oh, well, NATO's not essential to us. We could withdraw from NATO. We could do this. But Europeans are calling his bluff, saying, okay, let's start talking about a world without America in NATO. And while the long-term objective of the Trump administration may be to disentangle ourselves from NATO, in the short term, if we divorce ourselves from NATO, we can't control, the direction or the tenor of what Europe does in the future. So they've called Trump's bluff. This was one of the reasons why he is, downshifted on moving forward with a peace plan with Russia, because Europe is complicated. Trump didn't have a plan B to deal with this. So no, but Europe's not going to go to war. They don't think they could. What they're doing is muddying the waters for Donald Trump's prospects of peace. The Trump administration is of the opinion that before the U.S. even can consider that, Europe has to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. But we want to teach them how to stand. We want to be the ones. We want a NATO that, while we don't pay the price we're paying, still does our bidding, which may be, of course, a bridge too far and impossible to achieve. But I think in the short term, Sergei Lav's right. Look, if Trump wanted out of NATO, they've given us more than enough justification to pull the plug. But Europe has successfully called Trump's bluff as a leader in Europe, position Germany as a leader in Europe. And he, has a good sense of the feel of the political winds. And he knows that European security independence is essential in terms of being projected by the current leadership if they want to stay leaders. Understand that there's a tremendous amount of opposition to this. Within Germany itself, the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, is fundamentally opposed to this, and they came in with the second largest voter turnout. So he can't take the middle ground, because in doing so he plays to AfD's strength. So he's taking an opposing point in hope that, being backed by Paris, who, again, here we have Macron imprisoning Le Pen. We have Starmer, who has no support. We have Europe. All of this talk about, a European force going into Ukraine is contingent upon Romania staying in play. And we have a situation where the Romanian presidential election in May may go to a party that wants to unplug Romania. So, Germany has to lean forward aggressively as part of an overall European Union strategy, but it's suicidal. In the end, this will bring about the economic ruin of Germany. But since when did politicians care about long-term consequences? They only care about short-term political gains. And he himself indicated that he was cognizant of previous war games where the United States lost every time, and nothing has changed to that fundamentally in terms of force structure and capabilities that would suggest the United States will do anything other than lose if we push for a conflict with China today. This is part of this ridiculous peace through strength mantra that the Trump administration has, embraced. But for that to work, there has to be genuine strength. And the United States doesn't have genuine strength of the conventional kind. And if he's talking about the potential of nuclear conflict with China, then we've entered a whole completely different paradigm that's irresponsible in the extreme. So this is the problem. I'm looking back and reevaluating Trump's embrace of the ceasefire, because when it originally came out, and this, I thought that it was indeed a legitimate attempt to bring peace and stability into a region that's beset by horrifically complicated problems.
Right.
But it appears increasingly that this was just a psychological warfare game, lulling people who were exhausted by 15 months of incessant violence, lulling them into the belief that there could be peace, and then resuming the conflict and blaming Hamas for everything. And I think we've seen a global community that's increasingly becoming exhausted by the Palestinian issue. So much so that they're remaining silent about the murder of 16 aid workers. The murder of 16 aid workers. Where is the condemnation that should be happening? Where are the demonstrations in the streets? Here in the United States, the Trump administration is making it illegal even to think that this could be a crime. I think that the Trump administration is even worse than the Biden administration, because as bad as the Biden administration was on this issue, it at least responded to international condemnation, at least showed that it was listening and that it cared. I don't think Trump cares at all. I think this is an administration that is absolutely it's unforgivable in the approach they've taken that disrespects the value of life amongst the people in Palestine, and uncritical of an Israeli regime that is the most craven violator of international law there is. I mean, for this spokeslady to be talking about international humanitarian law in the context of Israel is disgusting. The king of the hill is Donald Trump. As you rightfully pointed out earlier, one phone call brings this to an end. And while Netanyahu is up there, acting tough, remember, domestically, he's in a horrible position, under tremendous pressure. The Shin Bet, his internal security forces, have turned against him. He's under investigation for corruption and for violating state secrets and for misleading the Israeli population. He's highly unpopular. He's a tool that's being used by the United States to achieve objectives. And we see that the control mechanisms being put in place today in the United States that violate free speech, they're using Israel and anti-Semitism as the vector to introduce them. But as you know, Judge, once a right is conceded, you never get it back.
Right.
Once you open up a chink in that armor and let the enemy in, you lose the whole game. And so this is a very dangerous time in the United States, where we're allowing Israel, the cause of Israel, to be used by American domestic power, political powers, to take control over the totality of the American people, to deny us the one thing that gives us all of us the ability to fight back, which is free speech. And so I view Netanyahu more as a compliant tool than the one calling the shots. He's the puppet, not the puppet master.
But if he is the tool, what is Trump's goal? Is it just to please his Zionist benefactors in the United States? Because Trump doesn't have serious concerns about the Gazan people. We know that. He couldn't care less about them.
No, I think he's using. I think he's using this issue as a means of putting in place a framework of authoritarianism. I mean, I hate to say it. I'd like to believe otherwise, but when I take a look at the laws being talked, the rhetoric being used, again, as you know full well, Zionism is the cause, but the framing of the argument that allows the Trump administration to target free speech, once they have that framework in place, they can remove the term Zionism and insert anything. And I think that's the goal. This is about absolute control of America in a way that differs greatly from the vision of our founding fathers. Iran has some very capable ballistic missile forces, but I'll push back on him. And if I were talking to him, I'd say the same thing. Don't confuse a glass Airbnb with a glass house, because striking these bases is not striking America. And yes, you may do harm to these bases and all that. We will destroy your nation. And that's not a threat. That's not me threatening. It's a statement of fact. The United States of America will not lose an existential battle against Iran. We have the ability to destroy Iran. Iran can hurt us, but not survive what comes next. And this is what's frustrating about this whole thing. The Iranians are on the right side of history. They have every justification for the stances they're taking, but the stance they're taking is positioning them, setting them up for a potentially fatal blow to be delivered by the United States. And again, I'll point out that, I firmly believe that if we do go to war against Iran, we will terminate the Iranian regime. But the consequences of that action, just like terminating Saddam Hussein, were catastrophic, led to the Arab Spring, led to a destabilization of the region. And if we take out the Iranian regime, what we'll find out in hindsight, is the Iranian regime was one of the most effective stabilizing forces in the region, that they helped keep peace. They don't have a weapon, but they're 1 week away from having a weapon, and that's unacceptable. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty does not give you the ability to build up the capability just short of the weapon and then imply that you have the weapon. When you sign the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state, you commit to not pursuing nuclear weapons. And today we have a situation where Iran has installed some of the most advanced centrifuges in the world, and they have stockpiled 60% enriched uranium hexafluoride, which has no other use other than to be sitting there as a loaded gun against the head of the West. Now, I know Iran is doing this because they say that this is deterrence, but the fact of the matter is they're deterring nothing. They're waving a red flag in the face of a mad bull who's going to charge. Iran, and it's not me saying this, Judge, their own leadership, Larijani, came out and said, if you attack us, we will go nuclear. And we've had former foreign ministers, the current generals in the IRGC further quantify, saying that Iran has all the components of a nuclear bomb and they can assemble them within a week. So that's the reality of the situation. And it's a dangerous situation that, Iran isn't helping at all by taking this hardline stance. They have every right to take it. They're justified. Absolutely. Look, if China and Russia were going to do anything, they'd be doing it now. You'd have Russia knocking the door down at the United Nations, passing, getting resolutions out there, creating hurdles for the United States to cross. All Russia has done come out a statement that said, if the United States attacks, it will lead to, regional instability. Well, that's a statement of the obvious. But what is Russia doing diplomatically to prevent this? And the answer is, at least overtly, nothing. They signed a strategic framework agreement with Iran, which is not a treaty. It was actually a mechanism that could lead to a resolution of this issue should Iran not double down on stupid. And I don't mean to call the Iranians stupid, but I am. Again, possessing the ability to produce a nuclear weapon within a week is not where you want to be at this point in time. It doesn't, people could say, well, they have every right to do this. That doesn't matter. What matters is that they've done it, and now this poses an existential threat against Israel, who is, for better or for worse, probably worse, an ally of the United States. And we're not going to allow this situation to go forward. It's a very dangerous situation. But if Russia wanted to stop this, or were intent on stopping this, they'd be at the United Nations right now throwing resolutions out there, and so would the Chinese. Look, he does have one card, and that's the good faith card. And what that would be is to take the cards and put them down and say, I'm not playing a game here. I'm not trying to, out-Trump you and outbid you and all this. I want peace. And I recognize that you are the victor in a war that is characterized more accurately as an American war against Russia, using Ukraine as a proxy. So I understand that you have beat us. And what I want to do is mitigate the impact of this defeat by getting you what you say you need, but maintaining, sufficient infrastructure so that the United States is not a complete loser in this. The good faith card, where we were serious about this. I thought that was the card that Trump was going to be playing early on, especially when he sent Steve Witkoff over there and they met with Kirill Dmitriev, they met with Vladimir Putin, and they began this remarkable process of engagement that was unprecedented. But the most recent rhetoric out of Washington, D.C. shows that Donald Trump's not serious at all about this. He continues to coddle Zelensky, which you can't do. He empowers Europe through his indecisiveness. Rather than telling Europe to sit down and shut up, he continues to engage with them and allow them to bluff him into not taking the decisive action that he needs to take to bring this conflict to an end. And Russia is aware of this. The Russians are, of course, being very demure in their approach diplomatically. But we look at the reality. We look at the statement of Putin. We look at the statement of Rybakov, and we look at the statement of others, Lavrov. The Russians know darn well that the United States is not negotiating in good faith, and they are very clear-eyed about this, and clear-eyed about the need to continue moving forward, not to hold out hopes of somehow, an American economic revival of Russia. They're saying, even if we get peace, we're not inviting these companies back in because we don't want to open the door to America being able to threaten us with sanctions, threaten to withhold. We don't trust the Americans, nor should the Americans ever be trusted again, at least not under the current iteration of leadership. First of all, Trump wouldn't be the first president that's tried to intimidate Putin. George W. Bush, when he withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, was somehow saying, we're going to build these missiles, but you don't need to worry about it. And Putin went, no, we're not worried about it. We're telling you what the consequences will be. That if you do this, we're going to take actions that overcome whatever you think you're going to build. Is that intimidating Putin? No, it's Putin being very pragmatic and coming up with a response. He did the same thing with Obama. He made a mistake with Obama. He actually negotiated in good faith for the New START treaty under the belief, based upon Rose Goodmuller, I think her name is, the negotiator, her promise that the United States, while they couldn't incorporate anti-ballistic missile issues into the New START treaty because of the politics of the Senate, that if Russia would just get this thing done, we promised to go to the table and address the anti-ballistic missile issue. And we lied, straight up lied. Well, that's a lesson to Vladimir Putin, too. You can't trust America. We did the same thing on Minsk. Biden promised Putin that we would put pressure on the French, the Germans, and the Ukrainians to implement Minsk. He made that promise in June of 2021. And while Blinken was supposed to be out doing that, Blinken instead was in Kiev secretly transferring Stinger missiles and Javelin missiles for the war that we were planning. We had no intention of implementing Minsk. We were always planning on this proxy conflict. The Russians know this. So Putin isn't intimidated. Putin has made responses. Everything we've done, especially when we violate our word or violate, the code, Russia has a response to. You can't be intimidated when you are pragmatic, when you are informed, and when you have the capacity to respond effectively to anything the other side does. It should be Trump who's intimidated by Putin. That would be the smart thing, not to be intimidated and surrender, but to be intimidated and say, I need to get out of this card game, because we come back to the card analogy. You're sitting at the table and you're looking at your chips going, man, if this thing goes on, I'm going to lose everything. And I've got a wife and kids at home and a mortgage need to be paid. Why don't I just fold my hand, take the chips and leave what I got so at least I don't lose everything? And that's what he needs to do right now. Trump is in a position of we're going to lose everything. And what we need to do is stop this card game, stop this war, because Russia's going to win everything. They've got every card. It's going their way. And Trump needs to do that, but he's not. He should be smarter than this, but he's surrounded, I think, by people who give him horrible, horrible advice. I participated in Operation Desert Storm, which included the strategic air campaign against Iraq. And we blew the crap out of that country, excuse my language. But I will tell you that every target we struck, there was definitely, because I was a participant, there was a moral argument that you had to be able to articulate the importance of this target, and you had to understand what the consequences of striking this target were, and then you need to articulate why this was proportional and why the military necessity outweighed the potential for innocent civilian life. And many times when you couldn't make that argument, we didn't strike the target because we were in the business of defeating the Iraqi government, but we weren't in the business of deliberately slaughtering the Iraqi people. This attack in Yemen, it showed a total callous indifference to the value of Yemeni life, 100% callous indifference. And it's a shame. It's a shameful moment because normally you'd expect in chats like this for the real side of a person to come out. And if this is the real side of our leaders, America has much to be ashamed about. I don't necessarily buy into everything that's attached to that, but I think when you have the Director of National Intelligence, coming down hard on Islam and Islamic extremism, that you don't turn around and recognize the most extreme form of Islam as is manifested in Syria today. But we're between a rock and a hard place. We created this demon. And we created this demon for the purpose of overthrowing Bashar al-Assad. But let this be a lesson to everybody who's talking about going into Iran and bringing down the regime. The day after, if you don't have a plan for the day after, the week after, the month after, a year after, and know where you want to go and know what the potential pitfalls will be, and you're ready to overcome them, all that happens is chaos and anarchy, and you make the situation even worse than it was. There's no way today anybody can articulate that the situation in Syria, as it currently exists, brings more stability to the region than when Bashar al-Assad was the president of Syria. We will normalize relations with Russia if Vladimir Putin denounces the Russian language, denounces the Russian Orthodox Church, denounces Russia's victory during the Second World War, and agrees that May 9th, instead of being Victory Day, will be America's Supremacy Day over Russia. Now, if you're willing to do all of that, we'll be able to work with you going forward. That's about as realistic as what she said here. Is it the United States that we have no control over the situation? Because all of the things that she stipulated there are a reflection of the fact that what's happening in Syria today is 100% chaos and anarchy, and that we have no say over what's happening. So she's trying to superimpose conditions, which, if met, would imply that America is in control. But none of those are going to be met, because I just want to remind your audience, this is Al-Qaeda. Okay? These are the people, the ideology, the organization that attacked us on 9/11. And she's actually talking about a potential where we can reform Al-Qaeda. The only reformation of Al-Qaeda comes with a 7.62 bullet through the head. There's no reforming Al-Qaeda. They're evil. This is why we go after them. They murdered thousands of Americans, and it's a horrific ideology that should be eradicated. They are a rabid dog that needs to be shot. That's not what she's saying, though. She's implying that somehow we can do business with Al-Qaeda. Well, I'm from New York. No, you can't, and nor shall you ever. Not as long as I have a breath. I will never agree to making peace with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda will only be resolved when every one of them is dead or renounced their religion, their extreme religious beliefs, and they have been shown to be reformed. Other than that, the only way to deal with them is to close with and destroy through firepower maneuver.